When I started working on the sermon yesterday, I realized I'm preaching to an afternoon session where most of those who we would consider sluggards have already gone back to their hotel rooms and are tucked into their bed and they're taking a nap. So I kind of thought maybe we'd just have nap hour for a little while for the rest of us who are workaholics. My wife has been grateful to Ozark Christian College for assigning me this topic. It's amazing what you get done when you're challenged to study the topic of working diligent for about 6 months before it is time for you to preach. And yet one of the things I have recognized during my time in the text and wrestling with this conversation with Scripture is that Proverbs is not only for the foolish, it's also for the wise. These simple truths, Proverbs are, simple truths observed in creation, yet profoundly lived out in relation to God. And like a good father, in the Proverbs, God uses everyday moments to teach us timeless truths. I love being a dad. During my time here at Ozark Christian College, I was a children's minister in Carterville and a college-age minister at Carterville Christian Church. The two had something in common during the time. And as a children's minister, I learned how fun it was to hang out with children. And as a dad, I have enjoyed that time. I have 3 children, and Bob's pretty correct. Sometimes you kind of wonder about them. And so as they have grown, my daughter who is 6, her name is Grace because she is God's gift to us. My son's name is Sawyer. His nickname is Sawyer the Destroyer, the Master of Disaster. I mean, that's the full name. And I've had this opportunity and yet this burden to, like the Father, desire to instill this wisdom that is rooted so deeply in God's creation. I mean, and we see kind of like a sprout coming out of the ground. We see the evidence of it, but the closer we look at it, the deeper the roots go. And I want to have that opportunity as a dad to teach my kids some of these things. And so I look for those everyday moments, just like Proverbs does. I look for those everyday moments to teach my kids this wisdom. I was in the garage with my son. His name is Sawyer. And as we're in the garage, we're learning how to hammer a nail into a board. This was my idea, not my wife's idea. She would probably have other words to say. And as I'm teaching him, he's 2.5, about 3 at the time. He has a little tiny tack hammer, and I have a full hammer, and I'm teaching him how to do this. And I turn away for just a moment. And as I turn away, he learns a valuable lesson. It's a valuable lesson in life. That your finger, sometimes your thumb, makes a great target for a hammer. And I turn around and there are those tears. His eyes are big and they're watery and there's tears coming down and he's going, "Dad, why could you let this happen to me?" Right? And I say this wisdom that I got from my father, "Son, it'll feel better as soon as it quits hurting." I was with my son in our kitchen and I didn't know what he was doing. He was sitting off on the side, and he was quiet. That's usually a sign for some concern. And I walk up to him, and I see him down on the ground, and he's looking at what is going on here. And as I see him looking on the ground, he's watching a trail of ants come into our home. In Illinois, I think our house is built on an anthill. And these ants are coming in. And in my personal opinion, these ants should be bowing down and like singing praise songs to him because he leaves them the food. And he's there and he's observing these ants, and yet he's taken his little 2-year-old fist and he's pounding them into the ground. I mean, he's just kind of, I'm going, "Oh my goodness." And so I get down next to my son, get eye to eye to my son, say, "Son," put my arm over his shoulder. "Son, let me tell you, God created these creatures, right? I mean, I'm trying to be a good dad. God created these creatures. And son, we need to treat them with kindness. They're God's creation." And then kind of looked at me like, "Okay, Dad, I got it." And so I got out the poison and poisoned the ants. And I'm reminded in moments like that of the simplicity of Proverbs, and yet how often through wise everyday moments have we been shaped down to the root of our being, even sometimes unknowingly, by the wise statements, the wisdom, the Proverbs of those who have been around us. I'm grateful to have had those around me, like my time here at Ozark Christian College. I will say without reservations that this place changed the trajectory of my life. I came here as a very broken student. I pretended that things were going well, but I came here as a very broken student. And it was the likes of the professors, the staff, the faculty here. It was the friends that gathered around me in the dorm that really shaped me, but spoke wisdom in those everyday, mundane moments like homework. And I'm thankful for those things. And so what I want to do today is I want to walk with the Father to some very ordinary, very mundane locations. And I want to just walk with God and allow Him to speak into our life and to speak into our existence about something so mundane and everyday, something so ordinary as work. Work can get ordinary, can't it? And when it gets ordinary, it can get boring. And it can lose its purpose. And we can lose our motivation. And work is kind of like that. And so how do we thrive when it comes to work? How do we continue to be motivated through generations and years of difficulty, of mundane, of ordinary, and even of joy? How do we continue to be or how do we continue to thrive in this ordinary place called work? God would take us perhaps as a father and He'd say, come here, you got to see this. And kind of like a kid, we're going, okay, where in the world are we going, Dad? Right? Okay, Dad. He's like, no, right here. Look over here. You're going, what? What are you talking about? He's like, you got to look down there. Look down there. You're like, an ant? Dad, why are you showing me an ant? And God goes, no, look at it. I'm looking, Dad. I'm looking at the ant. He goes, no, look, consider. And He takes us to the ant. He says, let's go to the ant. And He's talking about this foolish character in the Proverbs, this foolish character called the sluggard. And Proverbs has these foolish characters throughout the book. And we who are wise, which all of us put ourselves in that category. Isn't it funny how we do that, right? We who are wise go, yeah, let's look at the sluggard. And it's this foolish character. And yet how easily we find ourselves slipping into these roles in life. And so God says, look at this ant. And you're going, what? What about the ant? Go to the ant. Well, first of all, I love how it starts with that, because that really is kind of one of the first steps to diligence, is like getting up and just starting to move. Just go, start. Go to the ant. Consider her ways and be wise. Look at this creature, how simple it is. I mean, we walk on ants. We poison ants. It's a simple creature. Nothing really profound about it. There's lots of them. They kind of just blend in with one another. And God takes us to this simple creature. He says, there's something about this creature that I want you to see. Something that's rooted down deep inside of creation that's just sprouting in this little creature called an ant. And I want you to look at this little creature and discover some wisdom. So you who are sluggards, consider and be wise. If this little creature is so diligent, this creature that's created by God, how much more so should we who are created in the very image of God be? This God who is a God who works. You realize that's fairly revolutionary in a lot of systems of a lot of gods. The Greco-Roman myths did not have gods who worked, they were gods who were lazy, and that was elevated. In fact, what Ben Witherington says is this: God in the Bible is described with rich metaphors drawn from samplings of almost every single existence of human labor. And so God is described as a metal worker, a garment maker, a shepherd, a gardener, a farmer, a tent maker, a builder, an architect, a musician, a refiner, a composer, and the list could go on and on. We worship, we live for, we are in the image of a God who has worked. And He worked in creation, He worked in history, and He works in Jesus, and He works in our life. And we are invited to become His co-workers in creation and in recreation of people. We are invited to work with God and partner with God in what He has created and what He has done. And so we're supposed to look at this ant and realize how simple it is. And yet there's profound wisdom that's just barely sprouting up inside of that simple creature. And is it blossoming inside of us? Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of knowledge. I say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of diligence too. So this simple creature, we observe it, we watch it, and it doesn't have any chief officer or ruler. There's no one standing over it. There's not a board of elders over each of the ants going, hey, this is where you need to go, this is what you need to get. They just kind of know what preparation, what diligence looks like. There's not a chief, an officer, or a ruler over any of them. We could add elders, board, boss, wife. It's funny, at Ozark Christian College, when I met my wife my freshman year here, you can follow my transcripts, and my grades went up when I met her. This aunt, she's wise. She prepares bread in summer. It's not something that's pressing. It's something that's far out there. She prepares bread in summer. She gathers her food and harvest, and there's this wisdom. God says, look at this ant. And we go, what? What about the ant? There's this wisdom of the ant. And I would tell my son, the diligent are those that work for an unseen master. But a fool needs an eye on him always. Ministry affords itself of some freedoms, doesn't it? There are moments in time where no one is looking over your shoulder, or no one is asking for an accountability of your time. At the same time, there are others who feel that perhaps they feel unnecessarily so. There are those over them who are supervised. They feel the need to have an eye on them. And I just kind of wonder, perhaps there's some insight into that. Proverbs says, like smoke to the eyes is a sluggard to those who send him. Is your work ethic smoke to the eyes? When you've been there at a campfire and the wind turns direction, smoke follows beauty. Yeah. The smoke that just stifles and brings tears, pain, and winces the face. Is that because of your work, how your leaders feel about you? Proverbs says the sluggard is wiser in his own eyes. Yeah, but it's not my fault. They just don't understand. Wiser in his eyes than 7 other people. Maybe that's a group of leaders. The slothful will be put into forced labor, and maybe we should be humble enough at times to ask. I know it's a sensitive topic. Maybe we should ask, are you called to give an account to your leadership because you failed to live accountable to God? The diligent work for an unseen master. Paul, when writing to slaves, surely servants and slaves have nothing to do with the Christian life. Writing to slaves in Colossians chapter 3, verse 22 says, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. Do it not only when their eye is on you, do it not only to win their favor, but do it with sincerity in your heart, with a fear for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as if working for the Lord and not for men. So we have this ant, and we're looking at these ants, and I'm just like, son, look at the ant. God's like, son, look at the ant. Daughter, look at the ant. And as we're looking at the ant, do you notice that no one's praising the ant? Have you ever gone down to them and said, man, that's an awesome ant hill. Good job. And just kind of applauded the ant. Good job. And there's no other ants that are doing that, right? There's not like a team of ants on the side going, man, you get a raise. Good job, right? You get to live lower in the ant hill now. There's no one doing that. There's something simplistic. Why is that? When no eye is on them, that they're still diligent in their work. And I think it's perhaps because of the the eye that is on them. This simple creature that works not to receive praise, but to give glory to the one who is not seen. I want to ask you a hard question. If no one else sees, is it enough that God sees? If no one ever calls you to move to a different church, another location, if no one ever recognizes your preaching, your leadership, your creativity, your excellent role as a parent, if no one ever recognizes you as a prolific writer, is it enough that God sees your diligence? And so God would take us from the ant, and he would lead us over to a bed. And again, you're like, Dad, please, a bed? What are you doing again, Dad? I mean, Dad. And he'd say, look at this bed for a little bit. How long we lie there, oh sluggard. Thanks, Dad, you're making me feel real good about myself about now. When will you rise and get up from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. I think there's a play on words of that word little. I think this is almost kind of that phrase that the sluggard says, I just need a little bit more. Just a little bit more rest, please, just a little bit more. And that word little is so ironic. The truth is that for a sluggard, their life revolves around rest. And so Proverbs 26, verse 14, this humorous metaphor, as a door turns on its hinges. As the door turns on its hinges, so does a sluggard on his bed. Does your life revolve around rest? Does your life revolve around comfort? Well, you might say, well, Jim, I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning every day. I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day. I realize that the bed stands for something. And it could be a bed, or you know what? Quite frankly, it could be a coffee shop. It could be a golf course. It could be Facebook. It could be in your office pretending like you're diligently working away, but you're really hiding from people. And so your life revolves around and is centered, is cored on, is hinged on your comfort and on your rest. And I want to also say this, rest has its place in discipleship, doesn't it? It has its place in the rhythm of life. At First Christian Church, we're teaching a series called Workology. I figured if I needed to study about work and God's work in all of creation, I'm going to make this into a sermon series, right? 2 for 1, that sounds like a great deal. We talked about rest last week, and I had our worship minister get up on stage with me and play the song, How Great Thou Art, and Amazing Grace, without any rest in the midst of the music. And it just sounded bad, y'all. And then he played it with music, and it was this powerful creation with rhythm. And rhythm is part of God's wisdom, like breathing in and out. And so yes, there are times some of you today need to hear this sermon. I can only give 30 seconds to it. But some of you need to learn the wisdom of resting. And why don't you rest? Probably because you don't trust. I mean, maybe you're too busy making a name for yourself, building a tower. Want to make a name for myself. And if I let go, that means I'm letting go of control. And so we've missed out on that rhythm, and it's like breathing in and out, that rhythm that we are designed that brings thriving life. And when you breathe in but you don't breathe out, you don't function that way very long with health. And so some of you today do need to learn this rhythm and trust God enough to stop, to turn off your phone, to put away your email, to trust that God, who created, who has put his wisdom rooted down into the depths of creation, is okay with you taking a break. And so one of the things that we learn about this is that rest is not the end game. It is part of the game. It is part of the rhythm, but it is not the purpose. And the problem is we've taken a gift of God and we've turned it into the purpose of God. We've turned it into a God. Anything that keeps us from doing uncomfortable work, diligent work that honors God, becomes an idol. And the wisdom of the bed is this: the diligent rests to live. The diligent rests to live, but the fool lives for rest. And we know that we're living for rest when we resist what is difficult and we resist what is uncomfortable. When that decision in leadership that we know we need to make is one that we resist, and because we've hinged ourselves to the comfort of pleasing people. We know that we live for rest when we only work for retirement. Now I know we're near retirement. And yet I know in our church how many people reach retirement and they find out that that idol that they had been living for, not that's just a phase of life, but they turned it into an idol, that it still comes up empty. And so when we're living for that purpose, Paul Stevens says, don't think that our design to work somehow arbitrarily stops at age 65. But I've also seen how powerful Opportunity can blossom when someone moves out of a work sector and they transition their work and how productive and what they do in the kingdom of God. We know that we live for rest when we make excuses not to work. Proverbs 22:13, a sluggard says, "There's a lion outside. It's snowing. I've never seen snow before," right? "I might be killed in the streets. They might get mad at me." How many times have you been paralyzed by fear? So you make excuses. There are so many times where fear can paralyze us from being diligent. As I look at my life, I'm amazed at how easily that slips in. I don't know what to do next because I'm just so afraid. Thomas Edison says this. It's on the desk of one of the people on our staff. It says this: opportunity is missed by most people because it's dressed in overalls and it looks a lot like work. Sometimes the only way to motivate a sluggard is to make resting more uncomfortable than working. So at Camp Sayokimo, when I was there, we came up with a way to get kids out of bed. And one of the things we devised is we realized that you could not just like douse a child or a student with like cold water or ice. I mean, you can, but there's definitely more creative ways to do it. And so we devised this way. We put marbles in a freezer. Like a bag of marbles in a freezer. And a student, after they, several warnings did not get up, this bag of marbles would come out of the freezer and go to the dorm, and you would open up the sleeping bag. Now, sleeping bags are a funny thing because everything that gets into the sleeping bag is kind of trapped inside that sleeping bag, right? And the bunk beds are always kind of an amazing thing because there's always kind of this big dip in the bunk bed. Wherever the kid is, that's where the marbles would go. And so you just dump these marbles into that cold bed. It's funny how fast a student could get out of a sleeping bag with cold marbles in there. What ends does God need to go to shake you out of having your life hinged on rest? When He's called us to pick up a cross. God would also take us to a field. He'd leave the bed. He'd go, okay, let's go outside. Okay, good, outside finally. He'd take us to a field. Illinois, we know fields, right? I'm from Colorado, went up to Lincoln Christian Seminary to kind of scope out campus, kind of see where we might be living. And I'm like, it's all the same. Grain elevators everywhere, right? And that's what it is. It's a field with wind, lots of wind. And as we're there, the Father takes us to this field. He says, look at this field. And you're like, it's just a field. I'm so tired of driving through fields. He says, I passed by this field, though. Proverbs 24, verse 30. Passed by this field of a sluggard, by a vineyard of a man lacking sense. I wonder what God would say as He passes by our field. Behold, it was overgrown with thorns. The ground was covered with weeds. The stone wall was even broken down. I saw it. I considered it. And God goes, see, son, look at this. Consider this. It looks like just a sprout in the ground, but the roots of wisdom go down deep. Look at this. What's going on in this field? I had a garden last summer in Illinois. It's a salsa garden. We have 4 tomato plants, a jalapeno bush, I guess it's called. Grow some cilantro. Tried to grow some cucumbers. That didn't turn out so well. We went on vacation. It's one of those vacations that we needed, but it's good for illustration purpose to tell this story anyhow. It was one of those days or one of those weeks where when we went to Florida, we went there to cool off from the heat in Illinois. Remember that summer? It was about 145 degrees. I came back to that garden. It was kind of sad. No salsa for the Dalrymples this year. Fried green tomatoes, that's what we had. And God says, consider it. What did it take to destroy that garden? Just neglect. Whoever is slack in his work, Proverbs says, is a brother. You're of the same genetic makeup of the person the man who destroys. so you can actually destroy. Now, none of us would go into ministry this way. None of us would enter into our families this way. None of us would enter into marriage this way. None of us would buy a house and say, my hope is to destroy the house during the time that I live here. But you're kin to them. If you're slack in your work, Proverbs says. Skidner says, by inches and minutes, opportunity slips away. Tour your field. A number of years ago, I was at a preaching seminar with Randy Garris. I've never told him this story, never had the opportunity to. He was preaching a 10-point sermon. I can't get away with that yet, by the way. And it was on the wisdom-filled life. It was one of those where I went home, and in the car on the drive home, went through a list of things that needed to change. Some of them in my marriage, some of them in my ministry, some of them about my physical health. We had a daughter 6 years ago, and I had gained as much weight as my wife did in the pregnancy. The fact is she lost it all somehow, and I didn't seem to. And it wasn't just the weight, it was the fact that it was affecting my attitude, it was affecting my ability to work, it was affecting my emotions. There's so many elements of diligence that in that moment needed to change. How had I gotten to that point? Inches, minutes, opportunities. The lesson of the field is this. If I were to say, son, look at the field, look at this field, the lesson of the field is this. Give attention to what you have. The diligent give his attention to what he has, but the fool destroys. The fool destroys by his neglect. It's not intentional. In fact, the fool even desires a harvest. Proverbs 20, verse 4, the sluggard does not plow in the autumn. That's a long ways off to harvest. He doesn't do the preparation, this forward looking. He doesn't plow in the autumn, but he still seeks a harvest. What's he doing during this time? While everyone else is plowing their fields, what's he doing? What's she doing? And now when the harvest is coming in, they're like, well, why am I not part of this? The soul of the sluggard, Proverbs says, craves and gets nothing. I'm convinced that the sluggard in all of us is the kind of character that peers at the fields of others, maybe through windows like Facebook, articles in the Christian Standard, statistics given at conferences, and we peer through the windows at the fields of others, and we are envious of their harvest. We want to live vicariously through the opportunities of others, and yet we're frustrated with our own lack of harvest. If only that were my field, if only that were my opportunity. But the truth is, sometimes when we look at the fields of others, we end up neglecting our own. They neglect their fields because they follow worthless pursuits, sluggards do. Proverbs 28:19, whoever works his own land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty. Have you built the kingdom of Warcraft more diligently than you have the kingdom of God? Have you worked more on your golf swing than you've worked on your marriage? Brian Brubaker said this, time is the one asset we have that will always be spent no matter what we do. And so the wise gives attention to what he has. And so I have. This is what I have. I have my family. And I'll tell you what, the sermon this morning, 2 years ago when they told me I'd be coming to preach, and last year when I learned out it was going to be wisdom literature, I was like, please don't assign me Song of Songs. Please don't assign me Song of Songs. Sermon this morning, once again, just shapes the way I want to take care of this gift God has given me of my family. Are you giving attention to what you have? Know well the condition of your flocks. You walk through the field with the Father and you evaluate You see, it might be overwhelming. You might be in a situation where you're like, God, there's so much work to do. And it might paralyze you. God, there's just so much to do because you know the condition of your field, the condition of your flock. And God's going, yeah, but you're not alone in this. You're a coworker with me. Trust me to go along with you on the journey. Let's do this together. Give attention to your herds. Philip Griffin said this, many of us think the grass is always greener on the other side. The truth is, the grass is always greener where you water it. God has entrusted to me to steward the fields that I have. I don't always understand why he does what he does. I don't always understand why he puts certain people in certain places. I don't understand why certain opportunities come to certain moments. But I believe in the intentionality of God. And so if he's given me a field, if he's given you a field, it's with intention. And let's not belittle one field over another. One of the truths that Mark Moore taught at ICOM that really struck me was this: Jesus is more passionate about your field, your ministry, your family than you are. He's so passionate, in fact, that he'd be willing to die for it. Jesus is the one who asks us to pray. We're familiar with the prayer here at Ozark Christian College. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 38, Jesus asks us to pray. When Jesus asks something to be on the prayer list, pray for workers, laborers. Notice he doesn't say pray for scholars, prolific orators, leaders who are dynamic, writers who are prolific. Now, we need those kind of workers, but he says workers, and they come in all shapes and sizes. Pray for workers in this harvest field, and the field is all shapes and sizes, all locations. He says pray for workers. Pray that they might come. And Jesus sees this field, and he has more passion for this field than what we will ever have for the field. And when we say field at Ozark Christian College, we see faces. Here's the conclusion of the matter. The fear of the Lord and the love of all people, his people, and dying to self that we see lived out in the life of Jesus. A fear of the Lord, a love of all people, and a dying to self, that is the beginning of diligence. And so I want to take you back to my son and myself in the kitchen on the floor with the ants. He has taken his small little 2-year-old, he's now 3, but he was 2 when he did this, taken his small fist and he has pounded them into the ground. I look at the ants. They're broken. I don't know how much an ant experiences pain or fear, but they're broken. And yet they're stretching and working and climbing and reaching and carrying towards home. And even in their brokenness, they bear a harvest on their back. Work diligently.